This is the Baunfire Gaming Podcast, episode 370. I am your host, Morgan, aka Bon Diesel, and this week we'll be talking about the Division 3 news. Xbox Developer Direct has been announced. Arc Raiders has big sales numbers, maybe, and much more. Be sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app, leave a review on Spotify or iTunes, and subscribe to the Bon Diesel YouTube channel to get all of my videos, including this podcast. Let's get into the gaming news. The Division 3 is, quote, shaping up to be a monster, unquote. This is from Julian Garrity, who was interviewed during the New Game Plus showcase. This is a new showcase put together by a handful of, I guess, notable gaming influencers. The only one I recognized was Jake Lucky, who is like a clickbait news poster who focuses a lot on like Twitch drama and stuff like that. So I guess they're, gaming related people. I didn't recognize anyone else, but it's cool that there's a new show. They had some pretty high profile games. They had a few games from Sony and Xbox. They had the Expanse game, which was pretty cool, and they had the Division from Ubisoft, and they talked about Division 2, Survivors, Division 3, and Resurgence, the mobile game. I am focused in on the literally like 30 seconds about Division 3, but basically the interviewer says, hey, what's going on with Division 3? What can you tell me? And it was so funny. If you watch the clip, Julian, who's he led up Division 1 and 2. He then went to Star Wars Outlaws, and now he's back heading up Division 3, and he's the head of the Division, like the franchise, the IP. So he's kind of, controlling everything. I assume he still has a lot of creative control over what they're doing with the game directly, though, with Division 3. And it was so funny when he asked about Division 3, because Julian looks off to the left, and he is 100% looking at, either some PR people or marketing people, or maybe some of the other senior developers on the game, because you can kind of tell he's kind of looking at him like, what am I allowed to say? And he doesn't say much. Now, the most quotable thing he said was, it's shaping up to be a monster. He went on to talk about basically how they want this Division 3 to be as impactful on the industry and on players as the first game was. I found that to be kind of an interesting quote, kind of suggesting that 2 wasn't. And I think it was. I think 2 is the significantly better game. It's, sales wise, I think it probably did better, honestly. But I think the conversation around it is different. I think the Division 1 did have more impact because it was new, right? It was something different. It had come a few years after a really cool trailer they showed, and ended up being a pretty good game that needed, about 6 months to a year to keep baking and finish. And then, they had some good post-launch content, including some good DLCs. And then the Division 2, it's easy to forget that Division 2 came out, I believe Division 1 came out in 2016. Division 2 came out in 2019. So that was 3 years after Division 1 launched, and only like a year after they stopped making content for Division 1. So, that was pretty impressive. That was a quick turnaround. On the other hand, it's now 2026. Division 2 came out in 2019. It's been 7 years. It's been more than twice the amount of time since Division 2 than between Division 1 and 2. So the big thing with that is Division 2 was very iterative. It was very much basically a gigantic DLC for Division 1 in a lot of ways. It used a moderately upgraded engine. It used, a lot of the same mechanics, a lot of the same models to a point, things like that. And there's definitely things when you look at Division 2 over the last so many years where it probably could have used a couple more years to bake, but it maybe not, because it sold really well. It's been pretty successful. They're still making new content for it 7 years later, and it doesn't seem like that's stopping anytime soon. So, him wanting to make that impact, I don't think that was a dig at Division Two. I just think it was a compliment to how Division One was what it was. I still think the most notable thing he said in this interview was confirming once again that they're making Division Three, but he specified that they are in production of Division Three. Now, I don't know if he's just using a word that works or if he was being specific, but in the games industry, I would take, talking about production or full production as they've got hundreds of devs working on this game and like completing parts of the game, right? Where when you're in pre-production or concept phases and things like that, you're kind of talking about it, you're planning things, you're putting up the scaffolding around the building, or you're putting down the foundation. But you're not actually making the thing yet, right? You're not doing the repairs yet. If they're in production, then I assume they're actively working, and that would make sense. Massive it's a massive studio. I assume it's around 1,000 people. And that was because they had a whole team on the Avatar game, which they just put out DLC for, and supposedly that's the last content for that game. And then they had Star Wars Outlaws that they worked on for quite a while. And that was most of the Division 2 team, where the Avatar team was a mostly new team to Massive. That was a team they hired up. There were some veterans on there from Massive, but for the most part, I believe that studio was or that team was essentially a different studio, right? So now we know that they're still doing ongoing work with Division 2, but that's mostly being handled by Ubisoft Bucharest. We know they're working on Division Survivors, which is essentially a DLC to Division 2, but seems like it's going to be bigger than that. It's going to be its own mode, that kind of a spiritual successor to the survival DLC back in Division 1. And they have Resurgence, but that's a mobile game that they're advising on that. I'm sure they're assisting with it, but that's not their game. That's a mobile studio, right? So it's very likely that those 1,000 devs, a good 700-800 of them don't have a job right now, and they're working on Division 3. That we just don't know that for sure. They did do a thing last year where they basically told people, hey, if you don't want to keep to work on Division, we're not doing the licensed games anymore. We did a couple of those. That was fun. We're done with that. We're going back to our roots. They gave people an opportunity to leave. Now, that was portrayed as a layoff. And when I talked to people directly, and I saw other content creators in the Division community who did this as well, I got direct confirmation from people who worked there that there was no layoff. They didn't force anyone to leave. And it wasn't even like a wink thing. It was legitimately just like, hey, we're gonna be a Division studio. If that's not what you want to do, then that's fine. Here's a golden parachute. You can head out, and we're gonna do what we're gonna do. I don't know how many people left. No one I follow left, but they were already Division people, so that makes sense. So Division 3, that's cool. It's pretty wild to think that the first game came out, the second game came out 3 years later, and now the third game may not come out 10, at worst, I would say 10 years after Division 2, so 2029. I think I doubt it's going to take that long. If they're in production right now, I suspect 20 or probably early 2028, I think is a good guess. 27 would be stretching it. It depends on how long they've been in production. But what people don't often realize is that once games go into full production, most games, even really big games, typically take 2 years to make, maybe 3. Obviously, that depends on delays and problems and all that, and world circumstances like when COVID happened. But as far as I know, I would be willing to bet 28 is likely, and we'll see. One of my big questions about Division 3 is, what is it going to be? Division 1 and 2 were so clearly chasing Destiny, at least in my opinion. Obviously doing their own thing. They have their own aesthetic, and it's a more grounded series, at least in some ways. Where Destiny's kind of space magic shooty guys, right? But there's no Destiny 3. There's no Destiny game for them to kind of chase. And I hope, and this is my personal bias, probably, but I would love to see Ubisoft Massive be like, okay, let's get back down to our roots a little bit. Let's look at that 2013 trailer that everyone still remembers. And let's see the feel that gave, where, the Division has become arguably almost like an arcade game. The story is not too super serious at this point. It's kind of silly, if you ask me personally. It would be super cool, in my opinion, if they brought it back down a little bit to reality, gave us something gritty, gave us something a little slower paced, and something a little more focused and grounded again. I don't know what they're going to do with the story. If you've paid attention to the story of Division 2 and its post-launch, the Division 2 base story was great. Then they did the DLC, which was really out of place and kind of made no sense. And then they've most recently done another DLC, which is like fine. And then all the manhunts, which were these like, seasonal activities that had story to them, they've jumped the shark pretty hard. It's pretty silly, in my opinion, where they've gone with, bringing people back to life from the dead and basically being like, oh, that thing you thought happened, actually it didn't, because holograms. And it's like, it just feels cheap to me, a lot of the ways that they've handled the story. And I genuinely have no idea how they're going to like wrap it up to be able to move it to a new game. And I'm hoping that new game is able to kind of reset the story and kind of put it back on a track that like makes sense, because it's gotten quite silly in my opinion, but that's just me. But Division 3 news, hearing from Julian, I can't wait for him, for Division 3 to get closer and for him to do all of his ethereal talks on how, this thing is so magical and majestic. He's a great talker. I've actually met him in person at a press event, and he's a very sweet man. He's very nice. Everyone I've ever met having to do with the Division was really, really cool. So I am curious to see where this goes. I suspect we'll start getting more consistent news about this game starting this year and over the next 2 or 3 years as they develop and finish it. We have a Xbox Developer Direct has been announced. It is going to show on January 22nd at 1 p.m. Eastern time here in the States. I do plan on co-streaming this. So if you're going to be home, if you're going to be around, if you're going to have your phone handy, check out my Twitch page and I will be streaming it on there. It's twitch.tv/BondDiesel, just like it's spelled everywhere. We know that this is going to have Fable, Forza Horizon 6, and Beast of Reincarnation. So Fable and Forza are being made by Playground, Forza being the venerable old franchise. Forza Horizon 5, wildly successful. It just got put out today that it may have sold its 5 millionth copy on PlayStation, which it came to multiple years after it came to Xbox, and still sold extremely well. So that's cool. Hopefully that game is super successful. I love Horizon. I put a good 10 hours into each one, and then I've got my fill normally. But cool story. Not story as in like narrative, but just a cool game to play. It just feels good to play. It's always pretty. It's very satisfying to play. Fable, the really old school game that hasn't had a legit entry in quite a while. They're supposedly we're going to see a ton of this game. So we have our old RPG, which is really heavy into your choices having consequences with both your own character and the world around you and things like that. Very excited for that. Beast of Reincarnation is interesting because it's Game Freak, I believe that's who it is. It's the Pokemon company, the people who make the Pokemon games. I am curious to what this is going to look like, because that studio stays pretty busy just making those games. This is a non-Nintendo game, so it's gonna be curious to what they do with like being able to make a game for a console that isn't like 2 generations old. I don't know, we'll have to see. Obviously the conversation around this is always with these dev directs. They almost always have secret games. Even on the graphic for this, it has like a big open space where they're clearly going to put another game, just like they did last year. I want to say it was Ninja Gaiden last year. That was the surprise. It was the remake of the original game, as well as Ninja Gaiden 4, which came out last year as well. So this time there's a lot of speculation. There's been lots of rumors of, it's going to be a third-party indie game, and that has just like right before I started recording, that was debunked, and now the thought is that it's going to be a first-party game, but maybe a smaller one. Supposedly, Ninja Theory is working on a game called Kiln, which is like a smaller sized, really action, combat focused game. So it won't be the big narrative, hyper realistic looking Hellblade type game. There's also thoughts that it could be, one of their other studios. I would love for it to be State of Decay 3 from Undead Labs, but all the rumors I've seen about that game is that it's like a year off, and that team which used to be like with State of Decay 2 was like the most community interacting studio I've ever seen. With State of Decay 3, they basically haven't some of their accounts haven't posted anything to any social media in like 2 years. So we'll see what happens with that. I really hope that game comes to fruition because I love State of Decay 2, and really I would just love a State of Decay 2 modernized, modern graphics, things that look a little better, Unreal Engine 5, bigger, more detailed, more polished. But the general idea of State of Decay is just, it's one of the few like survival type games I really enjoy. So I hope that comes out. I would love for that to be the fourth game. I suspect it's going to be either that Ninja Theory game or just one of the like Double Fine or something. We'll have a new game, even though they just put one out. We'll have to wait and see. Jason Schreier claims that Grand Theft Auto 6 is, quote, kind of a PlayStation exclusive, unquote. So this is going to be like a rant story for me. What I want to point out too, this comes from a podcast he did with that I've never heard of, but one that's actually fairly large, it looks like, in the game from a gaming perspective. One thing that is worth pointing out as well, this was also part of a story you may have seen where Schreier said that the game was content incomplete, that the game isn't finished yet, Grand Theft Auto 6, and that brought up speculation that potentially it's going to be delayed or whatever. I saw some other commentary from people being like, oh, a big game like this, they work on these games right up until the moment they release. Like, that's not what content complete means. For example, I remember seeing developers of Dragon Age the Veilguard comment on that game being content complete like a year and a half before it was done, before it launched at least. So like, I will say it's not that's I don't know how Rockstar makes their games. You're talking about a studio that has thousands of people at their disposal, right? So maybe their games don't need to be content complete way ahead of time and then go through like rigorous QA and testing and all of that, to fix bugs and things like that. You would think it would, especially with the type of game that Grand Theft Auto is, that's hyper open world, like whatever, like I think when I saw corrections being made by Schreier, it seemed more like he felt like he was taken out of context, but that the conclusions people were making from what he said maybe weren't wrong. That's me speculating and making my own conclusions, I guess. So I think Grand Theft Auto gets delayed to 2027. I think there's zero chance that game comes out in 2026. It's the game that never comes, right? Like, it will eventually, obviously, but I suspect they're if they aren't already at a point where they're like, ugh, we really don't want to put this game on the current consoles, like, it's not gonna work. Like, maybe it will, I don't know. I still think to this day, this is my Xbot hot take, that the next Xbox hardware will end up being the best place to play this game until they put it on PC. We'll see. Maybe I'm wrong about that. I probably am. I think it's the first quote though, where he said it's kind of like a PlayStation exclusive. I've ranted about it. I've raved about it. If you don't want to hear me make my little crybaby Xbox fan, commentary here, move on to the next story. The timestamp should be in the description or whatever. But like, this is just like Schreier hates Xbox. Like, he's made it very clear. Anytime he gets a chance to dunk on him, he does. It's fine. Everyone can have their own preferences. I think it sucks that, like, for a long time I would have argued that he's like the only quote unquote journalist in the video game sphere. And he still is. He does some really good original reporting on some big stories that within the industry that are really good. But man, whenever he speaks, like whenever he's on podcasts or interviews and stuff, he's pretty insufferable. Like, he's extremely biased. Kind of on another note too, he's like the most sensitive human being on earth. If you, in any way, shape, or form, you can see it on his social media and stuff, if you even suggest that he may not be right about something, or you just subjectively disagree with him on something, he doesn't handle it well. It's very much I'm the smartest person in the room thing that I've noticed, at least. And it's annoying in my opinion. It's I think it sucks that someone with his influence, it just has the personality that he has. But can't pick your personalities, right? But this thing is dumb because what's being described in the conversation around this was that PlayStation has the marketing deal for Grand Theft Auto 6, probably. Like, yeah, of course they do. Like, you're talking about a game that they're going to probably sell 50 million copies of. Like, they're going to do their marketing deal. One, they're going to do it with the one that has the most, consoles out there, which is PlayStation, at this gen at least. And two, PlayStation has the money to throw around. They're not putting out first party games. They're going to put out one, maybe 2 games this year from their first parties. Like, yeah, they have the money to spend. They aren't making games with that money. So of course they, and that's just kind of what they've done. They've done this thing where they either straight up do timed exclusives with third party games, or they buy the marketing rights so that they can portray the game as a exclusive, which is what's going to happen here. But him saying, oh, it's kind of a PlayStation exclusive. Like, it's not. In any definition of the word exclusive, it's not. Like, it won't be. And it's just, it's again, I'm cool with people having different opinions. I'm cool with these, journalists and stuff, drinking the juice for the right platform, because that's where, where they get their good stuff from. But like, it is like this portrayal and the way this thing is, because this should have been pushed back on by people. There should have been a bunch of people pushing back, being like, oh, come on, man. Like, you're just talking about a marketing deal. Like, this happens all the time. One of the funniest things about like Call of Duty being bought out by Xbox was that PlayStation always had the marketing deal with Call of Duty. And what was funny is that the first Call of Duty that came out, I think it was Black Ops 6 maybe, after the acquisition by Xbox, that deal was still in place. I don't think they canceled the deal, because you probably can't without it being very expensive, right? And so I believe that marketing campaign had PlayStation as the main guys. So it's just annoying. Grand Theft Auto 6 is going to get played everywhere. They're going to find a way to put it on Switch too. It's going to be awful, but they'll figure it out, I'm sure. And they can probably thank the Series S for that, because, they're somewhat comparable. But Grand Theft Auto 6, I do think that thing with it not being content complete or feature complete or whatever, that's insane at this point for a game that big. Again, maybe there's Take-Two magic. Maybe there's Rockstar magic. I don't know. But that's pretty wild. The Steam Machine prices have leaked. This is the Linux PC box that Steam is teased not too long ago. That kind of has the internal kind of hardware that's like maybe not quite as good as even the current consoles, but it does use Steam and you can install PC games, and people were excited about that. And it doesn't have Windows, which some people were excited for, but we didn't know a price. And, that's been a big topic of speculation for the last few months. I saw people saying that the Steam Machine was going to be like $400 or $500. And I would have to go back and double check, but my guess for the Steam Machine has been 1,000 at least. Especially, and that was before we even started getting those big price hikes in RAM and storage and stuff like that. So now there are some leaks that have come out from, I believe it's like a store inventory system. So it's probably not true. It's probably just a guess, just like all of them are. But the suggestion is that the 512 gigabyte model will be $950, and the 2 terabyte version will be closer to $1,100. I think those are going to go up. If you want me to be honest, I think it's going to be more expensive than that by now, to the point where I wouldn't be surprised at all if they don't make the Steam Machine. I wouldn't be surprised at all if they put out one of those, text walls where they say, hey, when we were developing that product and when we showed it, the environment was going to allow us to make a machine like that and it be relatively affordable and blah, blah, blah. But due to, recent hardware price changes and all that, we just can't release this product, reasonably. And the thing is that so many people were looking at the Steam Machine as like, oh, the Xbox and PlayStation killer. And that was never the intent. Steam does not. Valve does not care. They don't want to sell 50 million units of this thing. That's not their goal. I can pretty much guarantee it. Their goal was probably like 4 or 5 million max over the next like 5 years. Like this wasn't meant to be like a console replacement. It's meant to be like a living room box that you can play your games in your living room if you want, if you don't want to sit in your office or game room all day, right? So I think there when they revealed this and when they were developing it over the last couple of years, it probably made sense. I like I said, I wouldn't be surprised at all if we end up never seeing this thing. I just don't think it's going to be viable if it ends up being $1,200 or $1,300 for this PC that honestly you could probably make one not much like probably relatively similar yourself in a small form factor and for probably about the same price, if not a bit cheaper, especially with Linux. So I don't know. I'm not hopeful for that thing ever even coming out at this point. I do think it's also a sign for next gen consoles from PlayStation or Xbox that if they planned on releasing those in the next year or two, I do believe that Xbox probably intended on it this year or next. PlayStation probably next year or the year after. We'll see, man, because to get some big jumps in power and fidelity, you're going to be looking at technology that right now is like as expensive as it's ever been, and many times more. From CPUs, GPUs, RAM itself, memory, hard drives and stuff. It's not a good time to be making hardware. And I think that they're going to end up maybe pushing those back. It's a thing where I think the PS5 Pro ended up being a pretty smart decision by them, even if it is a pretty underwhelming product, because it's just enough more powerful than the PS5 that they have the ability to be like, look, we have a faster thing that's new. And I think if Xbox, if they cared about console sales at this point, which it kind of seems like they might not, they probably really wish they had something that they could just be like, hey, look, we have a slightly faster thing too. The problem is that now if they did that, it would be like $1,000. So, I think that with Xbox, they're just gonna be hanging tight until the next console comes out. And that may be, if it was planned for this year or next, we're probably looking at 27, 28, maybe 29. I don't know, man. It's going to be interesting, and I will be here to talk about it. Kind of in a similar light, multiple PC hardware manufacturers at CES, which is the Consumer Electronics Show in Vegas that just happened, are showing products like AM4, which is last generation motherboards. And there's a rumor that NVIDIA is bringing back their 3060 card, which is 2 generations old, and it's their lowest tier card. This just is a sign of things to come, I think. The reason this seems to be happening is that AM4 processors and motherboards are compatible with the last gen of RAM, which has gotten more expensive as well, but isn't in the same demand. It's gotten more expensive because people are buying it instead of the current RAM, which is more expensive. But that will probably even out. And it's not, like the manufacturer of that last gen RAM, which is called DDR4. Sorry. I'm sure it's still being made by people, and it's not getting sucked up by data centers the way that DDR5 RAM is. And so it's not that surprising that some of these companies, Gigabyte and others, are probably seeing the writing on the wall of like, oh man, no one's going to be able to afford to do a AM5 build right now, at least for the next 6 to 12 months. So let's make sure we have AM4 products out there for people who want to build something now. And then NVIDIA doing the 3060 Ti to this day is still one of my favorite cards. It was, for the price, it was insanely good. I don't know. I hope that they do like a 16 gig version or something, because you're going to need that VRAM to make that card still relevant. But like I said before, I'm assuming that they must either have a bunch of hardware for 3060s laying around, or it can be produced relatively cheaply by fabs that aren't being used to make the brand new super relevant stuff that's all getting sucked up by AI companies. So yeah, this sucks, man. It's bad. And from CES, that whole conference, this is where AMD, NVIDIA, Intel, all the big companies talk about what they're working on. And AMD and NVIDIA were all in on AI. They barely talked about video games. That's not their product anymore. They're making billions and billions off of selling AI crap. And it sucks. The one surprisingly nice thing was that actually Intel had a relatively AI free presentation in there because they're fighting for their lives. They're trying to get in good again with people with the good CPUs for laptops, for desktops, for phones, for all kinds of hardware because they fell behind. AMD's kicking their butt. And then they also have this kind of fledgling GPU, part of their company. And they're pretty good. And they've got a good upscaler called XeSS. And like, they are this little, not little, Intel's gigantic. They're making their own fabs and everything, but like fabrication facilities for hardware. So oddly enough, Intel almost feels like the comeback kid, and hopefully them being competitive again means that we'll see Nvidia and AMD kind of dial back and refocus. But man, while that AI money is good, I don't know if they're going to. Avowed is coming to PlayStation 5. Thank goodness. This is happening on the 1-year anniversary of the launch on PC and Xbox on February 17th. It's going to come along with a big patch. It's going to have, I think, like new weapons, I don't think there's gonna be straight up DLC, but basically a bunch of new content and fixes for Avowed. Avowed was a really, really good game. I'm not a super high fantasy guy. I didn't know much about that world that it's based in because it's based in the same world as some of Obsidian's older games. I pretty clueless with all that stuff, but I found the game to be very fun. I found the combat to be really good. Very pretty game, very stylized game. Just a kind of a joy to play. And it really impressed me early last year. It ended up falling a bit in my rankings in my top 10 for 2025. But that's just because I played so many great games last year. It's not the fault of Avowed. And especially for people who enjoy that high fantasy kind of aesthetic and stuff, it's going to be even bigger for people like that. That's not really my thing. It definitely throws me off a little bit. But even then, I was able to really appreciate it. The Outer Worlds 2 definitely kind of was more my type of game. But even Avowed was really good about being reactive to choices you made and things like that. Just a really cool game. I'm happy PlayStation gamers are getting it as well. This is the cadence I'm cool with. Release a game on Xbox and then 6 to 12 months later, release it on PlayStation and Switch or wherever else you want to put it. That's a cadence I can deal with. The day one stuff from just mostly being an old school, console warrior, I guess it still doesn't rub me the right way necessarily. I get why they're doing it. I just don't like it. But here we have them doing it the right way, I think. And I'm excited that people who haven't gotten a chance to play it will. So enjoy, PlayStation gamers. Arc Raiders has some huge sales, and I say that with a little bit of sarcasm, and we'll get to why. Reportedly, they have gone over the 12 million mark with their sales, and very curiously, at least the analytics firm that showed this suggested that Xbox and PlayStation have about a pretty equal split, around the low 20% of that 12 million in sales. That's kind of strange because it's, we don't have exact numbers, but there is likely 2 to maybe 3 times more PlayStations out there than Xboxes. This does kind of play into kind of a quiet thing I don't see much people really talk about, but I don't think people realize that gamers in general basically play like 1 or 2 games a year. And it sounds like, at least from what the analytics I've seen, is that PlayStation legit is like mostly people playing Madden, Call of Duty, and 2K basketball. So I don't think it's that surprising. I think that, it wouldn't be surprising at all to me if people who have Xboxes are a little bit more enthusiast and not kind of the more casual, play the same 1 or 2 games a year. I'm sure there's, people on both like that. But, I suspect if you're still in the Xbox ecosystem, if you're a Game Pass person, all that, you might have a slightly more varied thing there. So that kind of makes sense with Arc Raiders. I put a big caveat on this whole story, though, and this goes into a side rant I don't think I've done recently. Maybe I did. I don't know. But this comes from these numbers come from Alinea Analytics. They just guess from what we've seen in the past. The best note I have is that when Final Fantasy 16 came out on Xbox, these stories popped up a few weeks later of Final Fantasy 16 only sells 20,000 copies on Xbox, and they were everywhere. Like all of the major outlets covered this story. And I remember being like, what? Like that doesn't, like, that's weird. Like it's a Final Fantasy game. It was a pretty popular game. I don't think many people believe it's like the best Final Fantasy game ever made or anything, but you know, it was out and then it eventually came on Xbox. And surely it sold more than 20,000 copies. And if you dug into it, which I did and other people did as well, you found that these stories all linked back to this company, this analytics firm called Alinea Analytics. And what was so funny about it is if you dug deep enough into it, the individual who did this report about Final Fantasy 16 on the Xbox, when people pressed them about like, where did this number come from? They were like, well, we compared the number of reviews on the Xbox store to the number of reviews on the PlayStation store, and we know how many copies it sold on PlayStation. So we did the numbers and decided that meant that it only sold 20,000 copies on Xbox. I'm going to be straight up. If you ask me in any given moment, hey, did you know you can review games on the Xbox store? I'd be like, oh, can you? Okay. I think I've done it like once. And like the idea of like it's a way to try to figure it out, right? Fair enough. But then to present that information as like fact, and then have dozens of articles written, obviously doing the whole like Xbox bad thing about that, and then it was somewhat proven false later by it being one of the top selling games on Xbox last year. It's bad info. And so it's frustrating because I've seen, I think Giant Bomb, Windows Central, I think Kind of Funny as well, have platformed, I forget what the guy's name is, who is the head of this. He's blocked me everywhere because I've brought this up every time I see him getting platformed by people being like, hey, what was going on with that? Because they never corrected themselves. They never apologized. There was never like an explanation for, why they put that report out when it was clearly not true. And they had really bad methodology to figure out the numbers. And now this is being platformed. And so, Arc Raiders, maybe it sold 12 million copies. I have no idea, but neither do they. And literally, if you look on the graphics they make, it literally says, basically guesswork by Alinea Analytics. Like they don't know. They have no clue. They don't have like some inside source that's feeding them info. They aren't using some API from a sales system or something to figure it out, which is like the Circana report and stuff like that. Like they get their info from actual sales data and then they extrapolate from there. This Alinea Analytics isn't doing that. They're presumably, I wouldn't be surprised at all if they're figuring this number out the same way as they did the other one. They're just finding like weird metrics and guessing. And that sucks. So with this, I wouldn't be surprised at all if sometime in the near future, Embark, the studio who made Arc Raiders, comes out and says, yeah, we sold 12 million copies. That report was correct. Cool. Good guess by them. Good confirmation by Embark. But just as a caution, if you see any really nice looking graphics claiming how many copies of something were sold, and it says Alinea Analytics in the bottom left, be just the most skeptical anyone's ever been of anything, because it's probably BS, or at least until that. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they have some really good sourcing, or maybe they've done something, or they have some great algorithm or AI that figures this stuff out for them. I'm happy to be proven wrong. But so far, it literally just looks like the guy who runs this firm and the people who work at it basically just make up whatever stats they know are going to make for good stories. And then they go on podcasts and stuff and talk about that. So just throwing it out there. I'm sure Arc Raiders is doing great. Don't believe that analytics studio, at least not in my opinion. And the final story, Larian has completed their AMA, their Ask Me Anything on Reddit. This came up after their controversial takes from the head of it, Sven, or I don't remember how to say his name. I know I'm saying it wrong. Swin, I believe, maybe. Regardless, he basically said that, yeah, we're using AI. And people didn't like that. So, after him making some really huge blunders from a PR perspective, they finally were like, hey, After the holidays, we'll come back, we'll come to Reddit, we'll do an AMA. You guys can ask us whatever you want. And that's what they did here on the 9th of January. They did an AMA on Reddit, and a bunch of people asked questions. Now, basically what came from this was them being like, we will not use generative AI for concept work or writing, but we may use it if we train it on our own stuff and if it's ethical, is what I gathered from the answers. But it was hard to get anything from the answers because literally, at least when I looked at the thread, it was just Baldur's Gate 3 fanboys being like, do you wish you would have done this? What did you learn from this? Like, you know, the whole point of this was to basically grill them on the AI stuff. And at least all the top questions I saw just completely avoided it. So look, it's going to get people off their back. These companies are just going to keep using AI and they're not going to talk about it publicly. And that's just the way it's going to be. So hopefully they keep the AI crap out of the actual games. Hopefully they don't let it replace real art and real models and things made by human hands. But yeah, they're just going to go underground with it, or at least that's my take. As for some content updates, the only thing I really have this week is that my Extra Life fundraiser that benefits a local children's hospital is we're 10% the way to our goal for the whole year already. So we're $100 in. If you want to donate, if you want to help out with that, I'm still thinking up some goals and some you know, if we hit $50, if we hit 100, you know, we'll figure something out. Maybe I'll do some stuff with my stream. You can look at the link in the podcast or the video description on YouTube. There should be an Extra Life link in there somewhere for you. Either way, if you find my link tree, you can get me. It's in there as well. So you know, $1, $5, $10, anything is very generous and helps out a lot. The hospital that specifically this one is going to go to is one that helps a lot of the disabled clients I work with in my real job, and it would also be the hospital my daughter would go to if she ever had some kind of significant issue. So they do great work. They do the best work in my opinion, and it's something I really care about. So I haven't done it for a couple of years. I'm happy to be doing it again, and we'll try to have some fun with it as the year goes through. And that is where we are going to wrap this one up. Thank you for listening to this episode. And thank you to everyone who supports as YouTube members or Twitch subscribers. If you are interested in supporting this podcast and all of my other content, please check out the links in the show description. If you have any questions or feedback, hit me up on social media at Bondiesel or at the Baunfire. Join my Discord via the Linktree link in the episode description, or comment on Spotify or YouTube. No one comments on Spotify, so if you comment there, I'll respond. It's pretty much a guarantee, unless you're mean, and then I'll just ignore you. But do it. That is all I have for this episode of the Baunfire Gaming Podcast. So until next time.